Welcome back to the channel, lads and ladies, and welcome to, well, what may be my final video on helicopters for a little while, as I've been really excited about them, but I'm starting to feel like I've said enough. There's definitely more to be said as the game mode for helicopters continues to develop, so I suppose I'll start with the basics. In this match, I decided to play the meta, so this is the best way of winning that's available to me until I unlock the AH-1G, in which case I will be winning by spamming guided missiles. But that day has not yet come, and I really feel like the AH-1G captures the essence of the most fun gameplay that I've found in helicopter game mode to this point, and that is that the AH-1G handles reasonably well. I'm looking at you, Huey, you are a pig. It's not really the Huey's fault, the thing just slops all over the sky. I feel like it has an incomplete or an unfinished flight model, but that may just be me. Moving on to the AH-1G itself, I've already talked a bit about this aircraft. It's one of the few helicopters that does not have access to guided missiles in any form, and that leaves it with, what are these? Well, heat-based rockets that deal a good amount of damage against enemy bases and ground installations. They one-shot light pillboxes and any kind of tank that they hit in this game mode, and they're a very reliable weapon system. High rate of speed, good long-range capability as far as accuracy, and coming in large numbers after you unlock the appropriate wing-mounted pods. So all in all, very effective. And the defensive armament on the 1G is also not bad, with 2 chin-mounted rifle caliber miniguns, which can dish out a cloud of, well, stinging projectiles, we'll call it. They do significantly more damage at close range or against exposed modules, and are not all that effective when compared with the cannons or heavy machine guns that you find on other birds, but they do have that spray and pray potential with a lot of ammunition, giving them, again, good usability against ground targets and the ability to engage at longer ranges and to sort of peck at enemies consistently. The aiming style for the guns on the AH-1G is not the best, as your gunner does not get a special gunner view, and the aiming reticle tends to flop all over the place if you perform any kind of maneuver. It's very difficult to maneuver and fire accurately or even effectively under most circumstances, so that is something to keep in mind. It does mean that generally you'll be making sustained bursts at enemies, or firing in a quick burst defensively and then attempting to maneuver, and that's not going to work out all that well for you. Now, we've been doing something that I haven't been explaining, but it should look familiar to any of you that have been playing the helicopter mode. We climbed toward an enemy airbase, we unloaded all of our rockets, and now we're not going to jump out of our vehicle. That would be the meta way to win a match quickly, but I'm really here to try to ensure that my team wins. Again, we're playing meta, but we're not playing hardcore here, because we do want to make a profit in Silver Lions. It's just a good habit to get into, and I honestly don't enjoy just jumping out of a perfectly good helicopter when I could cause some mayhem and mix things up a little bit. I don't want to play a bomber, so we ditch our ordnance and we get low now to go and pester some ground targets. And again, this is about 3 minutes into the match by the time that we took down that enemy base. So while you watch us pestering some ground-based AA and they definitely have the ability to hit us back. No worries about that. The randomness with which you receive critical damage from enemy ground-based anti-aircraft guns is nothing new to people that have played Air RB, but well, be that as it may, things will progress reasonably well for us from this point on. We're not going to be the most deadly bird in the sky, but let me just give you a little bit of explanation on why we're playing the way we're playing today. So I'd been playing a lot of matches with my AH-1B XM30 with the 30mm gun turrets, and those cannon turrets are a lot of fun, but they do mean that we have a 9.7 battle rating in our lineup. And I was told by another person that's been playing this helicopter mode with me, and by the way, welcome to all of you helicopter pilots. I've really learned a lot by connecting with you guys, and that's one of the reasons that I share about my channel with you who are in matches that I play, is you end up giving me hot tips like this one. And that is, he told me that when he put only the AH-1G in his lineup, he never saw a heat-seeking missile. So could it be that you can create a room, or you can put yourself in a lineup where you won't have to face heat-seeking missiles by selecting an 8.0 helicopter? Well, I decided to test it out, and indeed, I never saw a heat-seeking missile in this entire match. Did not see any AH-1Zs, did not see any late Mi-24s. So that is awesome. That's very encouraging to me, and it makes me confident once again in my decision to put a talisman on the AH-1G. Great aircraft. Honestly, probably the best starter helicopter for that reason, and it sits in the American tree. So now, of course, our goal is to die gloriously. If we can pick up a kill or two along the way, that's just fine by me, and you can see how it is difficult to get guns on target. Anyone who's tried to shoot down a helicopter at medium to close range has probably noticed that they don't necessarily move in the easiest way, and the miniguns on the Cobra just, well, they don't quite have enough punch to deal critical damage in any short amount of time unless you're very, very close to your enemy. So we're obviously going down here, but that's sort of the point of enduring confrontation, and one of the best things about this game mode is that there's no back to the hangar for you. It's right back into the action, and it's easy for us to decide how to carry on from this point. Now I'll go ahead and explain a little bit about how to climb in the AH-1G or almost any other helicopter. Initially, because this is arcade mode, we'll get a boost to our how would you put it, I suppose, elevation. You get a bit of a boost when you're first coming off of the helipad. After that, you'll want to gain airspeed by keeping your nose tilted down. As long as you're going more kph or mph airspeed, that is the goal. And then, as you saw, we tilt back, and I like to go into free cam and turn the camera sideways to get a good look at exactly what angle I'm tilting at, and then that also means that my elevator controls will be locked in that position as opposed to being free, to where if I hit the up elevator, then it would just jump right back down when I'm facing forward. Does that make sense? Anyway, we nose up to gain altitude, and then we nose back down again to resume gaining airspeed, and we try to continuously gain altitude as we move toward our objective. If your objective is a hot zone, you might want to climb more aggressively earlier in your approach. If not, well, that's up to your judgment. And that's one of the things that I found interesting about helicopters in general, is that when they're facing each other, there are definitely reasons to hug the dirt, or to fly at around 1 or 2K altitude. I would consider 1K a good maneuvering altitude, 2K a bit more of a safe zone, as many enemies will not be able to effectively engage you more than a kilometer away unless they're using guided missiles, and I'm talking of course about wire guided missiles for this game mode. I didn't mention that you can still find helicopters that are using ATGMs or some equivalent of guided, wire guided or radio beam manually guided missile to try and hit you, although those are a bit less competitive on vehicles that don't have some powerful defensive guns to back up that ability. And that's something that you'll probably notice in this match if you are keen on the details. Now you see, obviously we jumped down on a target of opportunity, rather, and that was just part of our decision to not play the scumbag. But when the chance arose, we don't necessarily have to spend the whole match taking down enemy bases, and that's something that I find much more comfortable when compared with the early meta of this game mode when when secondary weapons reloaded in flight and everyone had unlimited ordnance, which meant that bases were quickly destroyed by rockets fired from helicopters that were cruising at 4 kilometers altitude and firing from about 10 clicks away from the base that they were destroying. It's definitely an improvement today, and if it's true that there is a matchmaker where it will create a room for you, in fact I believe this room was created for my queue, which is nice. If you've been looking for matches, that's definitely one of the more shady and difficult to understand aspects of this game mode. How to get into a match, what do these odd error messages mean that I'm told. And that guy was obviously guiding in some guided missiles, some sort of ATGMs, trying to use them in an air-to-air fashion. And so you can see he's sitting perfectly still, and yet it's very difficult for us to deal any significant amount of damage to him with our miniguns, so we fire off a volley of rockets to make ourselves lighter, and also on the off chance that we'll be able to take him down. A little bit of fast footwork as we hear a missile coming in. Another one coming in, we dodge handily. It's very difficult to put a bead on as we take him down. That was very satisfying. Very difficult to put a bead on someone who's maneuvering aggressively in a helicopter, and in my update video on how to dodge heat-seeking missiles, I described some of the maneuvers that I was using. If you're interested in helicopter maneuvers, I also made a video on that, but if you've been following the channel, of course you know that already. One of the reasons that I like to mention these things is, again, helicopters are a quickly evolving field when it comes to understanding how to use them and what is good and what doesn't work so well, and it's just exciting for me to get in on the ground floor, as it were. I definitely hope that helicopters find a place within the larger meta of War Thunder that doesn't only involve curb stomping enemies from extreme long range with guided missiles, but we'll see. We'll see. For now, this game mode has been a lot of fun for me, and honestly, this match was the most fun I've had, and never once did I have that hot rush of rage that I would get flying in my face when I tried to do things like maneuver in a Huey, or, well, play the way I was playing. Going after ground targets is lots of fun until you get jumped by someone using a heat-seeking missile, and the missile warning shows up just in time for you to try maneuvering, and then you die. And this game mode seems to be a lot more, well, balanced when you're not facing Mi-24s of the late variety or AH-1Zs. And of course, as more helicopters and more nations come into the game, the balancing issues will be shared by more people as they get interested in these vehicles, and so it would be essential. I'm very glad that there appears to be a place where earlier helicopters can play without worrying so much about the extreme power gap between beginning and top tier helicopters. I would like to see more lower battle rating helicopters, and I honestly think that the something like a 7.3 battle rating for the AH-1G would be fair, along with other starter helicopters, and just to have a few helicopters that do not have access to guided missiles, and also perhaps to give a range limit to those missiles, something historically accurate or realistic, or if nothing else, say 3 to 4, even 2 to 3 for some of the models, kilometers, to make them able to be used at lower battle ratings in order to, well, give a fun place for helicopters to play in a more colorful way than sitting at long range and sniping. But of course, all those things are questions for another time. In any event, there's one more thing I wanted to tell you guys before I wrap things up here, and that is a little bit of a guide on the heads-up display. I don't fully understand every aspect of it, so if I'm missing out on something, please feel free to let me know. I would appreciate that. But first off, you see sort of a T reticle, or a capital I looking thing. That is where our rockets are aimed, and that is a reasonably accurate scale. At the middle or toward the top of the eye is where the rockets are aimed. Toward the bottom is where they will strike after about 2 kilometers of flight time, and that just really varies based upon your altitude and relative speeds and fun things like that. But that reticle, as you can see, is reasonably accurate as we pick up some ground kills here, and it will vary depending on which aircraft you're using. The AH-1J has its rockets mounted without an inclination, so they're facing the same direction as the nose of the helicopter, and you'll see that capital I reticle overlapping your attitude indicator. So speaking of, the large circle is our heading. That's where we're aiming with the mouse, and the nose of our aircraft will tend to align with that eventually because we're using mouse controls, theoretically. And the attitude indicator is what looks like a capital W with its hands out as though shrugging its shoulders at the terrible performance of the American Huey, and the arrow pointing out of what would be the shoulders of our shrugging man is your relative velocity indicator. So that's roughly your heading. That's where your helicopter wants to go, or where your momentum is carrying you. And so you would adjust your helicopter blades and such in order to adjust your course to where you want to actually be headed. What else? The square is where your gunner is aiming. That is a relative guide, and it's not perfect. It jumps around quite a bit, and on vehicles like the Huey XM30 with its 2 turrets, it only follows one of the turrets, and then it locks in place once it moves out of the arc of that turret, and it takes a second to jump over to indicating where the other one is aiming. In the case of the Huey XM30, you would also be able to use the circle, the heading indicator, or the mouse indicator to tell you where you're aiming. As for fuel, fuel is limited even in arcade mode, and so deciding what fuel amount to carry does matter sometimes, especially if you're playing around the back row, like you've seen me do in my other videos with the Huey XM30. And you can run out of fuel. There is currently no fuel indicator whatsoever in the heads-up display, and I feel that that is a serious error of omission. This is an aircraft, it consumes fuel, it crashes when it runs out, and it carries a limited supply. Why do we not have a fuel indicator in the heads-up display? Who's to say? What else? On the right side, you see our current distance from the ground in altitude. Now, this is not the absolute altitude that you see in an aircraft, in a regular fixed wing aircraft. This indication is actually a distance to the ground, so it's not relative altitude from sea level, it's altitude from the ground, and that is helpful because it allows you to use your instruments to fly, to set your distance from the ground to whatever you wish as you maneuver your helicopter. And just keep in mind that is not, again, altitude above sea level, it is distance from the ground, taken from a point directly below your helicopter, so keep that in mind. Excuse me, on the sliding scale, the number that's in the negative right now, but soon to jump quickly up into a positive number, is our rate of climb. So negative is a descent, positive is climbing, and you'll notice from earlier in the video that when we tilt our nose up, that rate tends to go up, and when we nose down or reduce the collective, possibly even doing both, that number can go into the negative quite rapidly. So that would be indicating things that we've already talked about when it comes to the flight performance of helicopters. As we're getting shredded by someone from below, we're in the melee here, trying to make ourselves useful. So what else? The RPMs is your rotor blade RPMs. You do want to keep those above 90% for most vehicles. Once they start dropping to inefficient levels or ineffective levels, you will get a red warning number on that indicator, and it would behoove you to increase your RPMs. How to do so? Nosing up or reducing the collective. Those are the two ways to increase your RPMs. When you nose up, it winds up your rotor blades, and that's really sort of the best way to describe that. I prefer nosing up to reducing the collective in most circumstances, and that brings me to the next subject. What is col? What is the collective? It's indicated by the COLL indication on the left side of your HUD, and that tells you how much air each rotor blade is collecting. In other words, it's the angle of the rotor blades. Imagine moving your hand through the water when you're swimming. When you cup your hand and pull water, you can feel the resistance, and that is how you pull yourself through the water. If you knife your hand and slide it through the water, you can extend your hand through the water without pulling, and that is reducing the collective. You're not resisting the flow of the water, and so you're able to move your hands freely through the water. The same effect is happening with your rotor blades. When you want to swim through the air, you cup those blades, tilting them toward the movement of the central shaft, if you will, of flaring them out, pulling more air, and thus propelling yourself in the direction of lift. If you want to reduce lift or increase RPMs, again, because you're producing less lift, you're scooping less air, those blades are free to spin more rapidly, improving their RPMs, that's right. And so if you need RPMs, you can reduce the collective. If you need to fly, if you need lift, increasing the collective is the way to go. And if you want to turn lift into speed, merely move your nose down to increase speed, tilt it up to reduce forward speed, trading it for altitude and lift. Hopefully that is helpful to some of you guys. There's also an indicator for the amount of ammunition in your defensive guns or main guns. You can see it's labeled as CAN, cannon, even though it is not a cannon that we have mounted as our defensive guns. And as you equip other weapons and systems, you'll see the ammunition count on the left side there along with. There's also a fire tempo indicator, and that is how quickly you're firing your gun. There may be a few reasons for manually reducing your rate of fire. You have, I think, 2 modes to select from, rapid fire and, well, slower rate of fire. But I always stick with the maximum rate of fire and use my trigger control to decide how that's going to play out. I've heard you can have better accuracy when reducing the rate of fire, and I will have to play with that one of these days just to see exactly what effect it has, especially in a heated combat, if it's worth it to get that increase in accuracy in exchange for rate of fire. Anyway guys, I've talked plenty long on this subject, and there are still several more things to cover when it comes to using a helicopter, but I'll take a break for now. I'll catch you guys in the skies, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye. Oh, actually, one last thing. I'll go ahead and show you the results of this match, and you can judge for yourself whether it's worth it to play the way I was playing in this one. And again, I'm not the most skilled player, but being aggressively average and keeping an eye for how to make things work for you has its advantages. Catch you guys later. Bye bye.